You know, when we think of airplanes today, we usually picture those sleek, uniform tubes with perfectly balanced wings. But if you look back at aviation history, it's actually filled with machines that look, well, completely absurd. So today, we're going to dive right into why some of the strangest-looking aircraft in history were actually brilliant, or at the very least, incredibly bold engineering solutions.
Looking at these bizarre machines, we really have to stop and ask ourselves, why on earth does that look like that? When you see an aircraft that's completely lopsided or has a giant bulging nose, was it just a huge engineering blunder? Or were these unusual shapes a necessary, kind of agonizing step toward a massive technological breakthrough? Well, spoiler alert, it's almost always the latter. Form follows function, even when that function requires a seriously weird form.
Okay, let's dive into this by organizing all these chaotic designs into 3 specific, urgent engineering challenges. First, the airborne radar anomalies. Second, rethinking the airplane wing. And third, monsters of heavy lifting.
All right, Section 1, the airborne radar anomalies, fitting square pegs into round holes.
So, during the Cold War, militaries faced a really massive problem. They were absolutely desperate to get bulky, heavy radar systems high up into the sky to detect enemy threats. But planes are supposed to be aerodynamic, right? To visualize this clash, just look at the extreme lengths engineers went to. Instead of building totally new, stealthy planes from scratch, they were literally stuffing these highly complex, sensitive radar systems into whatever spaces they could find. We are talking about giant snouts, massive tail domes, and incredibly cramped noses on what were supposed to be agile fighter jets. For instance, take a look at the British Nimrod AEW-3. They wanted an advanced, domeless radar, but that tech still had to go somewhere. The result? This giant, bulging snout on the front and another massive bulge on the tail to give it coverage in multiple directions. It's a perfect example where the radical function of housing advanced radar created a completely bizarre shape. But, unfortunately, the technical problems with that very radar system were just too difficult to solve, and the incredibly strange-looking Nimrod program was canceled before it even entered operational service. Then, over on the other side of the Iron Curtain, you've got the Soviet Antonov AN-71. It was famously known as the Madcap, and honestly, it's easy to see why. Soviet engineers took a standard cargo plane design and just slapped a massive, heavy, rotating radar dome right on top of the tail. Just looking at its shape, it seems incredibly unstable, like it should struggle to even stay upright in the air. Yet, completely defying its own ridiculous appearance, it successfully flew as an early warning station. It worked, but the project was ultimately scrapped when the Soviet Union collapsed and military priorities shifted overnight.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Think about the MiG-17 PF. The original MiG-17 was designed as this sleek, fast daytime fighter jet. But Cold War demands were shifting at lightning speed, and suddenly they needed to intercept enemies at night and in terrible weather. So what did they do? They literally jammed radar equipment into a fuselage that was never meant to hold it. They crammed it right into the nose, completely altering the jet's natural, streamlined shape. It just goes to show how adapting older technology for really urgent demands can radically, fundamentally change the look of a machine.
Moving right along to Section 2, rethinking the airplane wing, breaking the fundamental mold. In this era, redefining the wing itself pushed aviation engineering way out of its comfort zone. Looking at the German World War II-era Blohm+Voss P1111, you seriously get the feeling designers were living by this exact idea. What if we just made something weird on purpose? The P1111 is wildly asymmetric. Nothing lines up the way your brain expects it to. It looks like they were intentionally creating a lopsided puzzle just to see what the next generation of flight could actually be. It never made it into production, but it was developed seriously enough to prove a point. Not every aircraft has to be a raging success to be important. Sometimes they just push the boundaries of what we can imagine. So the crucial point here is that these unusual shapes weren't just weird for the sake of being weird. Take the Nurshevich ringwing. Imagine boarding a plane where the wings don't stick out from the sides, but instead they form a giant continuous loop around the entire aircraft. It looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But actually, this was a highly serious scientific attempt to solve a universal problem, flying smoother and using less energy. The whole idea was to see if this closed loop could better control airflow and cut down on drag. While it didn't become the new normal, it stands as this incredibly bold attempt to completely rethink how an airplane gets off the ground.
And rethinking the wing has actually led to some massive modern breakthroughs. Just look at this timeline showing the evolution of the US Navy and DARPA's X-47A Pegasus. At first glance, it literally looked like a flat kite that escaped from a windy beach. I mean, the design was almost too simple, just a flat shape with an engine. But that specific shape was absolutely intentional, to reduce radar visibility. In the early 2000s, this weird little kite proved that a pilotless system could handle super complex flight missions. It directly paved the way for modern drone warfare and the advanced X-47B, proving that the future of flight might not need a cockpit crew at all.
Finally, let's explore our third category, monsters of heavy lifting, tackling impossible logistics. Sometimes, an aircraft looks bizarre simply because of its sheer, unbelievable scale. When militaries face impossible logistics, the demand for massive transport creates literal monsters. Think about this number for a second. One entire space shuttle. The Soviet Antonov 225 Mriya was built for the singular, radical purpose of carrying a whole Buran space shuttle right on its back. Because absolutely nothing else on Earth was big enough to transport it, engineers had to build a flying behemoth. The Mriya was so massive it made normal cargo planes look like actual toys. And the craziest part? Despite carrying a spaceship on its roof, it still handled like a standard jet. A total logistical miracle.
But hey, heavy lifting isn't just about weight. It's also about getting into impossible, tightly constrained places. To solve the logistical nightmare of delivering troops to areas without runways, engineers came up with the common K-16B concept. This thing was a wild hybrid. Step 1, lift off completely vertically, just like a helicopter. Step 2, shift into forward fixed-wing flight once you're up in the air. This design pushed mechanical complexity to its absolute limits. And while it never hit mass production, its incredibly ambitious design language definitely left a mark. It even inspired the Mammoth Tula for any of you who play GTA Online.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast between traditional vehicles and one of the most impractical yet awe-inspiring military machines ever created, the Soviet Lun-class Ekranoplan. Think about it. Airplanes fly high but get spotted by radar. Ships carry tons of weight but are super slow. The Ekranoplan sat perfectly right in the middle to create this massive, stealthy sea monster. It didn't fly high, and it definitely wasn't a boat. It just skimmed the ocean's surface at blistering speeds, armed to the teeth with anti-ship missiles. So how exactly did it pull this off? It utilized something called the air cushion effect. By flying super close to the water, it created a pocket of high pressure right beneath its wings, basically hovering just above the waves. This allowed it to move way faster than any ship while staying low enough to completely dodge radar. A flawless stealth weapon on paper, right? Well, in reality, it was a total nightmare to operate because even moderate waves made it incredibly unstable. Still, it really highlights just how far engineers were willing to push experimental tech during the Cold War. Ultimately, looking back at all of these bizarre designs, from those giant radar snouts to continuous ring wings to ocean-skimming monsters, they all prove our core thesis. In aviation, weirdness is almost never an accident. Form follows radical function. These incredible shapes were driven by intense urgency, immense Cold War pressures, and, honestly, the boundless imagination of engineers trying to solve nearly impossible problems with whatever they had at their disposal. Which brings us to the very end of our explainer with one final provocative thought for you to chew on. As we look at the strange autonomous drones and those wild experimental electric vertical takeoff craft of our modern era, we have to ask, which of today's crazy-sounding, ridiculous ideas will actually pave the way for our future? Keep that in the back of your mind the next time you see a prototype that looks like a total mistake. It just might be tomorrow's biggest breakthrough.